Look, great to have you with us this week for our online experience. Special shout out to those of you joining us for the first time. We are so glad you're here. So open your hearts and lean in. Hey, we host our online experience every single week, 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Perth time, so you figure out where that is, wherever you are joining us from. But we don't ever want you to miss out. So what we would encourage you to do, if you're on Facebook, just like our page and even like this video. If you're on YouTube, here's a little pro tip. In the corner, there is our logo. And if you've got a touch screen handy, you can actually tap that logo and it will automatically generate the opportunity to subscribe. And by subscribing and probably hit that notification bell, you'll never miss out on any week of our online experience. So this week, our worship partner is Highlands Worship, joining us from the very famous city, Birmingham, Alabama. And we'd encourage you to join in wherever you are, sitting on the couch, on the move. We've got the lyrics across the screens so you can join in even if you aren't yet familiar with the songs, and just allow God to do something while you're worshiping Him.
Before time began, sovereign one. knowing all and still you love me, knowing all and still you love me. You are the song in my heart, and I can't stop singing. Oh, you put this love in my heart, and I won't stop singing.
The Savior crucified, the way, the truth, and life. Jesus, you're the resurrected King,
The one who came to save when I was far away. Jesus, I'm amazed you love me. Jesus, I'm amazed you love me. Oh, Jesus, I'm amazed you love me. You are the song in my heart, and I can't stop singing. Oh, you put this love in my heart, and I won't stop singing. Melodies of praise are rising up to you, God. Oh, lifting up my hands, I'll sing with all I am, God. Oh, melodies of praise are rising up to you, God. Oh, lifting up my hands, I'll sing with all I am, God. Oh, you are the song in my heart, and I can't stop singing. Oh, you put this love in my heart, and I won't stop singing. Oh, melodies of praise are rising up to you, God. Oh, lifting up my hands, I'll sing with all I am, God. Melodies of praise are rising up to you, God. Oh, lifting up my hands, I'll sing with all I am, God. Oh,
Now, did you know this is not the only time we facilitate an opportunity to worship during the week? We have a Spotify playlist. It's called Elevate Church Current Tunes, and we upload new music every 2 weeks. So there's always some fresh, new worship music coming through there. And that playlist is an opportunity for you to worship anywhere you are. You can have that on in the background. Hey Siri, play Elevate Church Current Tunes. Hey Alexa, plays. You can have your headphones on. You can be at a walk. You can be on the treadmill. You can be doing the dishes, doing the vacuuming, whatever. And take advantage of our playlist. It's free, providing you can have access to Spotify. Now today we are launching a brand new series called King of Hearts. And this is a little bit meta because I'm teaching it. So I'm going to explain what it's all about when I start the message, which is now. Well, hey there, Elevate family. Great to have you with us today as we launch a brand new series. More on that in a moment. It's actually the beginning of July, which means that we are, and I am, just over 1 month removed from my wife, Louisa's birthday month. Yes, you heard that correctly, birthday month. She loves every year to take the entire month of May, within which she was born, to celebrate. And in fact, not only does she take a month to celebrate, she always takes the preceding month, April, to launch a pretty substantial social media campaign, ensuring that all of her friends and family know that birthday month is coming up. And birthday month is just ongoing festivities, and one of which, as you could expect, is a family dinner, family get-together. And this particular year, I think the most memorable moment of that was the 20 to 30 minutes we spent with Louisa filming everybody through a variety of Snapchat filters. Absolutely hilarious. And you can play around with them if you dare. One of the most memorable ones, is called Crying Face. I wonder, have you tried out Crying Face? If you haven't, here's a little sneak peek of Crying Face.
Are you okay?
Are you doing a video?
What's wrong?
What?
What's wrong, Sarah?
I know what you're doing.
Let me see. What's wrong?
What do you mean?
Are you okay?
Yeah?
Are you having a bad day?
No?
Yep, that's how it goes. The more you laugh, the more it makes it look like you're crying. Which, using a filter like that, and there's other filters in there as well, pretty harmless fun. But really, the idea of filters is somewhat indicative of how our culture has increasingly shifted towards placing a higher priority on our outward appearance. I mean, Zoom even have a skin smoothing feature, which you go into your settings, it's called Touch Up My Appearance, and it gets rid of skin blotches and some wrinkles, even some flyaway hairs. I'm sure some people are hoping Zoom introduces a feature that makes it look like the sweatpants they're wearing are actually suit pants, but, well, they're not there yet. But there's just this idea of the outward appearance, and that as a consequence, everything is not always as it seems. Beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, globally, essentially, air travel was shut down. Nobody was flying anywhere. And it led to the launch of the Fake Plane Challenge. I don't know how many of you came across the Fake Plane Challenge, where essentially what the challenge involved was people taking photos of themselves to try and trick the viewer into thinking and believing that they're on a plane. And so here's an example of that. This is one social media influencer that took this photo and posted it to the Fake Plane Challenge, which, it looks pretty convincing, right? Until you actually zoom out and you discover she's using a toilet seat in front of an image on a television screen. Yeah. Everything is not always as it seems, and we put this increasing emphasis on the outward appearance and try to kind of project maybe a slightly airbrushed view of what's really going on for us. Because we've come to believe and we've come to accept that we make certain assumptions about people based on the externals. You know, based on how they look, based on the clothes they wear, based on the car they drive, based on the house they live in. We look at these externals and we make assumptions about what's really going on for people. And God's not against all of the externals. In fact, he even gets interested in some of the externals. But what's important to understand is they aren't his number one priority. That his number one priority is actually to pop the hood and work on what's going on the inside. In fact, the writer of Chronicles wrote it this way, that the eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. Here's a rhetorical question. Who wouldn't want to be strengthened by the King of the universe? Have your marriage strengthened? Have your career or your business strengthened? Have your relationship with your kids strengthened? Have your health strengthened? And God says, I'm in. I'm going to do my part to strengthen, but I'm looking for you to do your part and my part and our part to attract God and invite him in. To do the strengthening is that we would have our hearts fully committed to him. See, the good news is he's not looking for perfection. Hey, look, if you've already achieved perfection, you don't need God's help. You're there. You've arrived. But for the rest of us who aren't perfect, God's looking not for perfection, but instead looking for hearts that are fully committed to him. And this is critical to understand, that our hearts matter. You know, it's kind of the only time we really talk about the heart or hear about the heart or read about the heart is in two main spheres. One would be in sort of like the physical space. You know, maybe you're an athlete or you exercise, and so you're interested in heart rate and so on and so forth. Or maybe you go to the doctor and you want to get a heart health checkup, you know, an ECG and so on. And so, you know, there's an emphasis on the heart in those arenas. The other one, the kind of classic one, is songs. And Wikipedia concludes that there is at least 100,000 songs with the word heart just in the title. Here's a few. Some of these can be grouped into tragedies. Once upon a time, I was falling in love. Now, I'm only falling apart. Nothing I can do. A total eclipse of the heart. Sad. Then there are songs of elation. Near, far, wherever you are, I believe that my heart does go on. And then there's another category called, I call it like a preemptive strike. Don't break my heart, my achy, breaky heart. Yeah, I know. But when the biblical authors refer to our heart, and it comes up again and again and again and again and again, they were actually referring to something a lot more holistic. They were referring to essentially our entire inner self, our mind and our thoughts, our feelings and our emotions, our motives, you know, everything that goes on under the hood. They kind of grouped into this idea of the heart. And this is the stuff that God wants to strengthen. And he wants to strengthen our heart because he understands that life is lived inside out. And that if he can strengthen our heart, then that'll spill over into all of the other important areas of our lives. And so it's for this reason we're launching this brand new series today called King of Hearts, inspired by somebody who, listen to this, somebody who was actually described as a person after God's own heart. I mean, what an amazing thing to be said of you, that you are a person after God's own heart, that your number one priority in life consistently is you're pursuing God's heart. And this man is a man named David. And we're not going to be looking at David's life for information. We're going to be looking at David's life for inspiration that we can actually take away and use it for application and see God strengthen and transform our hearts. Now, it's around this time I would normally say pop open your Bible app and open it to such and such a passage. Before I do that, I want to bring you in on something that's very, very cool, just dropped this week around the Bible app. The amazing creators of the Bible app this week launched a church feature within the Bible app. So I want you to get your smartphone out, pop open the camera app, and take a shot. Use the camera app. Even if you don't know, it'll show you. It's pretty straightforward. And let it scan this QR code. And then tap that. It'll open up the Bible app, and it'll give you the opportunity to set Elevate Church as your church. And what that initially, I mean, I'm sure they're going to roll out more features over the coming months and so on. At the beginning, the two big features that we love that they've launched is, number one, you can actually interact with other Elevate peeps within the app. You know, encourage them. You see them read something. You say, good job. I'm glad you're reading the Bible. Someone's highlighted a verse. You're like, oh, boy, that's powerful. I like that too. So that's really, really exciting. And then the other thing is it allows churches to put in a featured plan. So what we've done and what we're going to be doing is putting in a featured plan every week around David's life during this King of Hearts series. So there's one already in there, a 5-day Bible plan. So all you need to do, as I said, scan this code. It'll take you to the Bible app, set Elevate Church as your phone, and you should be good to go. If you get a little confused, find a 14-year-old. They'll tell you what you need to do. Anyway, all right. So with the Bible app, how about you open it to 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Now, here's the backstory. Prior to me dropping you into this slice in Samuel's writing, Saul was the first king of Israel. And he was tall, he was physically impressive, he was like the people's choice. He was like, yeah, man, this guy looks like a king. He's got it all together. The problem is that over time, Saul stopped listening to God, stopped obeying God, started to do things his own way. And as you could probably guess, things started to get messy. Things started to unravel. And over time, as Saul started to put his trust in himself, God removed his hand of blessing from Saul. Whilst he was still the king, he didn't rule with God's blessing in his life. And at that time, one of God's spokespersons was a prophet named Samuel. And Samuel came to learn that God had removed his hand of blessing from Saul. And for the sake of the nation of Israel, this really bothered Samuel. Well, God took note of that, and God said to Samuel, I want you to go to the house of a man named Jesse, and I'm going to show you one of his sons who I'm going to appoint as Saul's successor, the next king of Israel. So Samuel went to find Jesse, went to his house, discovered that Jesse had at least 8 sons. I mean, the guy was insane. At least 8 sons. And Samuel introduced himself and asked Jesse to bring his sons out. And Jesse did that, lined them all up, lined up 7 of them. And Samuel called the first one to stand forward, like a lineup, but not for criminals in this case. Potential king. First one comes out, looks impressive, handsome, well-spoken. God says, no, sorry, not him. Samuel goes to the next one in the line, has him step forward, well-spoken, impressive, looks like a king. God says, nope, not him. And Samuel went all the way down the line, and every single time God says, nope, 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 nope. Got to the end, 7. And Samuel's a little bit confused because God had said, I'm going to show you which one of Jesse's sons is going to be the next king of Israel. And so Samuel looks to Jesse and says, you got any more sons? And Jesse says, yeah, actually, matter of fact, I do. I've got one more. But he's out looking after the sheep, which is code name for he's not that impressive. In fact, he's so unimpressive, we didn't even bother bringing him into this lineup because, there's no way God was going to choose him to be the next king. Samuel says, listen, bring him in. Go and get him, bring him in. So they fetched him, brought him in, and God says, yep, this is the one. Even though he was the least impressive, even though he didn't even get an invite to the original lineup, but then God spoke this to Samuel to recalibrate his perspective on what really matters. God said to Samuel, the Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And God said to Samuel, this is the one, anoint him. And that's exactly what Samuel did. Samuel put his hands on him. Samuel poured oil over his head, which was like a symbol of God's anointing. And he was in that moment chosen to be the next king. Now, he wasn't appointed at that moment. He was merely anointed. The appointment was going to happen, well, nobody knew when, but it was going to happen in the future. So now we have David, who experts believe was probably in his mid to late teens at this point. Now he's anointed, chosen ahead of his 7 older and more impressive brothers to become the next king of Israel. And rather than start bossing them around and ordering them and having them become subject to him and, bring me the chariot, he went back to the sheep. He just got back, like he knew that he wasn't appointed to be king, so I'm going to do what I know to do. I'm just going to trust that God's going to do what he's going to do in due course. I'm going to come back to that. But remember I said earlier, David has been described as a man after God's own heart. It's like one of the highest compliments I've ever heard in my life. And it kind of isn't a surprise because in his life, David did a lot of things right. He demonstrated tremendous courage to run towards a giant named Goliath and defeat him when nobody else even had the guts to take Goliath on. He wrote songs that we still have accounts of today, many of them in a book you'll find in the Bible called Psalms. These songs that continue to inspire us thousands and thousands of years later. David sacrificed again and again and again in the honor of God. But he also did a lot of things wrong. Let me encourage you with these actually, because some of us can identify more with David's failings than with his successes. So here's a little list. These might be spoilers for what we're going to teach over the next few weeks, but look, it's okay. It'll be worth coming back for more as we unpack this. But here's an example. God said to David to not take multiple wives, even though that was sort of common practice amongst high-profile people in the time. Don't take multiple wives, but David took multiple wives, plus added in a few concubines as well for good measure. And, by the way, as if that wasn't enough, David also slept with his married next-door neighbor and got her pregnant because, of course he did. You want to just make life complicated for yourself, David? Yeah, okay, sure. Then the husband of the wife, the next-door neighbor, found out that David had slept with his wife and got her pregnant. So what does David do? Well, the neighbor's in the army, so David sends the neighbor, the husband, after the front lines, knowing that he will get killed. So essentially, David was a conspirator to murder. And the list goes on. And God did ultimately forgive David for his many failings, but David still had to endure the consequences of his actions and his decisions. And that's a big distinction. God definitely forgives us when we seek his forgiveness, but it doesn't mean that dumb things that we choose to do that will evade the consequences. And in David's case, the momentum that he experienced early in his life as the new king, he lost that, and his kingdom was never the same again. And so with all of these failings, some of them pretty epic and egregious, it almost seems like how in the world could somebody who did all these dumb things be described as a man after God's own heart? And the clue is that as we read through the life of David, even though he messed up again and again and again, like me, like you, he kept coming back to God when he realized the dumb thing he's done. He would go back to God and he would seek God's forgiveness and God's presence, because it's almost like David's superpower was that he understood he wasn't perfect. And rather than pretend he was, rather than put on this facade, rather than try to be the king behind all of these filters, he acknowledged his imperfection and would go back to God again and again and again. And David's life, if we look at his life through the lens of 2022, the era and the culture we currently live in, it's easy to kind of wonder why God didn't cancel him, because that's what we do. People that don't meet our expectations, people that consistently mess up, it's easy just to cancel them because it's a lot less messy. But God didn't cancel him. See, when we start to look at David's life through the lens of grace, through the lens of a God whose endless love and mercy is poured out on David and wants to be poured out on us, who wants to strengthen David's heart just like today he wants to strengthen ours. He's looking not for perfection, but for people whose hearts are fully committed to him. And this lens of who God is, this is vital. And as we look at Saul's life and as we compare it with David's life and leadership, we see some stark contrasts, and most of these are informed by their perspectives of who God is. See, Saul was consistently consumed with his performance because he saw God as someone who was angry, someone who was judgmental, someone who expected perfection and wouldn't allow for mistakes. Whereas David knew that God wasn't looking for perfection, and in fact, in being someone that allowed his brokenness and mess to be on display, he instead put his attention into living for God's glory and to demonstrate God's glory. Saul was all about pleasing people. God help Saul if they saw who he really was behind closed doors. But David's like, look, I'm not perfect. So I'm going to live to please God, and I know that not everyone's going to like that as much. And then maybe the big one is the difference between Saul and David was Saul lived and led out of fear, whereas David lived and led out of grace. Saul was terrified to put a foot wrong, and yet he ended up consistently tripping over himself, just terrified that God was going to punish him and judge him and not let him off the hook. Whereas David, he led through the lens of God being a God of grace and endless mercy. And so because our heart matters, it's vital that we give attention to training our heart. And again, I'm not talking about this in an athletic sense. I'm talking about this in the sense of us becoming known as someone whose hearts are fully committed to God. Someone who, it could be described of us as being a person after God's own heart. But I got to warn you before I do, understand the things I'm just about to just kind of fly quickly over. These are not things in 2022 that you will typically find in the How to Become a Person After God's Own Heart conference brochure, because they're not glamorous. They probably wouldn't sell registrations, but they are vital, and they're things that David lent into. Now, I got these from this book here, written by Charles Swindoll, called David, a Man of Passion and Destiny. And in fact, Charles Swindoll, this was the first of what became a series of books that Charles Swindoll released of all the heavyweights. Incredibly compelling series of books. I'd encourage you to seek them out and get into them. This was the first one. And you'll find others about Moses and Paul and Esther and even Jesus. There's a book there as well. But before I list out what Charles Swindoll points to for what David did when it comes to his heart training, I want to just double click on something that really encapsulates the approach that David took. And it's something written in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10, where God said, "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." In other words, you got to start somewhere. And almost always, if not always, we start small. We start with what's in our hand at the time, not maybe what ultimately will be entrusted to us in due course. So here's three of the things that really typified David's heart training prior to him being appointed as the king. The first one was solitude. See, we live in a culture now where it's all noise all the time, where we can be, and it's often expected that we're always on. We've got people pinging us. We've got all sorts of inbound information. It's overload. We can just pop open our phones or our TVs or our streaming service, and we're always surrounded, always have access to other people, to the outside world, even from the confines of our lounge room, even from the confines of our toilets. We can be connected with other people. The problem, it's not all bad, but the problem of always being connected is it actually robs us of an opportunity to develop a depth in our heart that can only be developed in solitude, where it's just you and God, you talking to God and listening to God, and in turn developing a deeper relationship with Him, removing the competing distractions. Only that will allow us to get alone with God. And David did this out in solitude, and we could call it out in obscurity. See, as much as we're reading about and talking about and learning from David now, thousands of years later, when he was first anointed to be the next king, he was as far from an influencer as anyone could possibly be. Literally, his only followers were sheep. And one of the mistakes we can make if and when we're in a season of obscurity is we can kind of say to ourselves that we're going to do nothing. We're going to wait. We're going to wait until we're in the spotlight. We're going to wait until we get the promotion. We're going to wait until our business grows. Then it's going to matter. Then, because then people are going to notice. Then I'm going to get the applause and the plaudits and the rewards and the accolades. But whilst I'm in obscurity, what's the point? Nobody's watching. Nobody's cheering. Nobody's applauding. And yet we learn from David that this time of solitude and obscurity is the perfect time to be training our hearts, because we don't have the pressure of the eyeballs on us. We don't have the pressure to perform. This is all about the training, the preparation. See, David spent his time in obscurity with the sheep, playing music and writing songs, which we now call psalms. And by the way, and we'll come to this, his musicality actually was his first foot in the door into the king's court. I'll unpack that probably next week. He spent his time in obscurity fending off predators, protecting his sheep, bears and lions, and those skills of fighting were the very skills that he took into battle to defeat Goliath. He didn't wait until he was in the palace of the king to learn how to write songs. He didn't wait until he was standing face to face with Goliath to learn how to fight. He did all of these things in obscurity. And obscurity, by the way, is a great incubator for character development, because you're only doing what you're doing for an audience of one, God. And then third and final thing that Charles Swindoll highlights is monotony. I told you these weren't glamorous. Solitude, obscurity, oh yes, and let's throw in monotony. My physio, who I'm happy to say I haven't had to report to for a little while, when he first graduated from university, he actually got a job at the Australian Institute of Sport. And the Australian Institute of Sport here in Australia, located in Canberra, is really the breeding ground for a lot of elite sports, a lot of Olympic sports and athletes coming into the sport. One of them is a guy that you may have heard of called Ian Thorpe. 20-some years ago, he was at the Australian Institute of Sport for swimming, and my physio at that time was his physio. And my physio has told me stories of that time as Ian Thorpe's physio, that Ian Thorpe was required to swim 3 sessions a day, morning, noon, and evening, 6 days a week. Each session, 6 to 7 kilometers of swimming each session. In between that, several days he would be doing strength training. He would have to go to bed at a certain time, wake up at a certain time, eat certain things, not eat certain things. My physio has told me that sometimes Ian Thorpe would be giving Ian Thorpe a massage and like really getting in there, the sort of kind of that if he did that to you and me, we'd spring off the table and run for the exits. That instead Ian Thorpe would fall asleep He was so exhausted during these massages. It was just monotonous. 6 days a week, morning, noon, and night. But 20 years later, I can say the word "forpy," and a pretty significant percentage of the world's population know who I'm referring to and have some notion of his accomplishments, and he would never have got near any of them if he wasn't willing to undergo preparation that was hallmarked by monotony. And so these aren't bad words. Solitude, obscurity, and monotony. These are places that we either find ourselves in or can position ourselves in circumstances and seasons, and when we're in them, to lean into preparing our hearts for more of what's to come. Hey, we love that you are partnering with us to reach people and to build people by giving financially. And for those of you that already give and consistently giving, we say well done. And if you haven't yet, maybe that's a next step that God might want you to take today. And so you can do that electronically. The links are on the screen below, particularly our website, which you can do a bank transfer, easy if you're in Australia, or our Elevate Church AU app, which is easy no matter where you are in the world. Okay, well, that's it for another week, folks. We're thrilled that you've joined us. We really hope you've had the opportunity to grow and to learn and be inspired by this first foray into us looking at the life of David. Love you to join us next week. We're going to be going into week 2 of King of Hearts. And as always, bring somebody, invite somebody into your living room, onto your couch, and let's see together God use us to reach people and build people.